as we seek to receive your word spoken to us, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all the hearts present here, be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The other evening, my wife Vicky and I were rewatching the 1990 movie Awakenings, which recounts the true story about a neurologist who discovered the beneficial effects of the drug L-Dopa on catatonic patients. Robin Williams plays Dr. Malcolm Sayer, a neurologist seeking to help patients who are suffering from encephalitis lethargic, a disease which attacks the brain, leaving some victims in a statue-like condition, speechless and motionless. One such patient is Leonard Lowe, portrayed by Robert De Niro, who contracted the disease as a young boy and has been catatonic ever since. Well, Dr. Sayer discovers that certain stimuli will reach beyond the patient's catatonic states. Actions like catching a ball or hearing familiar music or simply experiencing human touch can help bring them a little bit out of this catatonic state. Well, after attending a lecture at a conference on the subject of L-Dopa and that drug, its success on patients suffering from Parkinson's disease, Sayer believes that that drug will offer a breakthrough for his own group of patients. And so he begins this trial run with Leonard, and it yields astounding results. He completely awakens from his catatonic state, which he has been in for many, many years. His mother, who has constantly been at his side, seeing to all of his needs, is overjoyed and overwhelmed to have her son back. He makes such a dramatic recovery that he even becomes romantically involved with the daughter of another hospital patient, and this success urges on Dr. Sayer to get funding so that all of his patients can realize this awakening back to reality. Well, unfortunately, as the movie goes on, and it's based on a true story, the group of patients find out that this is only a temporary measure, the effect of this drug. And so we see that the first one to awaken was Leonard, and he's the first one to demonstrate these tics and other things in his walk and mannerisms, and eventually he goes back into this catatonic state. As I watched that movie, my wife turned to me and said, "You didn't like it, did you?" I said, "No, I didn't." Because it wasn't a happy ending. I like it when things turn out well. It doesn't matter whether it's a movie or a play or a book or real life. I like it when things turn out well. I'm a sucker for happy endings. And all of that should make me really love the ending of the book of Job. Just a little background, those of you who may or may not be familiar with Job, we realize that for almost 40 chapters or so of this 42-chapter book, Job has been wrestling with this idea of what it means to be in the midst of suffering and feel like you are suffering unjustly. And he asks a lot of very pertinent questions to God. And right at the beginning, we're told that Job is blameless and upright. He feared God. He turned away from evil. He did everything right in his life, and still he lost everything. You remember that Job was considered to be the greatest man in all the earth. We're told that he had 7 sons and 3 daughters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and many, many servants. But one day everything falls apart. Servants come up to him and tell him that a group of marauders have destroyed his oxen and donkeys and many of his servants. Another comes up and tells him that lightning has caused a fire that consumed his sheep and still more of his servants. The Chaldean army made a raid upon his camels and took them and slew his remaining servants. And while his sons and daughters were eating and drinking in the eldest son's house, a great wind came over the wilderness and collapsed the house on them, and they all lost their lives. And then to top it all off, Job is afflicted with some kind of disease that causes all kinds of boils and wounds to come up all over his body, from the very bottom of his feet all the way to the top of his head. And you remember that picture where he's sitting up on the ash heap and he's got this piece of broken pottery just to try to, scratch those places in the ditch. And so 40 chapters, Job is dealing with God and with his wife, who tells him to condemn God, with his friends who tell him just to fess up to what you must have done wrong to cause all of this suffering. And Job, all he wants to do is listen to God and talk to God. And finally, God appears to Job in a whirlwind. And at that moment, Job realizes that he is way over his head. He says, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. And so Job doesn't really get the answer to the questions about unjust suffering, but he does get this encounter with the holy. And he understands that he's not alone in his journey of life and faith. All of this leads to a happy ending. Sort of. The scriptures tell us that after Job prayed for his friend, the Lord gave him back twice as much as he had before. His brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before came out to comfort him. He had now 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 female donkeys. He has 7 sons, I guess, to replace the 7 other sons, 3 daughters, I guess, to replace the other 3 daughters. The new daughters are even named, and they are apparently the fairest women in all the land. And Job lived to be 140 years old. He saw his sons and his sons' sons, 4 generations, and Job died an old man and full of days. Happy ending. I don't know about you, but when I hear this happy ending, it doesn't seem all that it's cracked up to be. It may even be a bit forced. It's almost like someone came along and picked up the book of Job and read the ending and couldn't tolerate it, and so they decided to tack on this happy ending. All the loose ends are brought together. But I wonder what really lies beneath this supposed happy ending. For as much wealth as Job received, could he ever forget the loss of all that he had built up, not to mention all of the servants who had served him so faithfully? As blessed as Job must have felt to have 7 additional sons and 3 daughters, would it ever erase the loss of his first children? Although the scriptures don't name his first daughters, Job knew their names, as well as those of his sons. He knew the way they looked, their own unique personalities, the joy they brought to his life. Now, I would imagine that behind this happy ending remains this heartache that will always be with Job and his wife. Which makes me wonder, what is the real purpose of the book of Job? And I think maybe it's not so much to explain why there is unjust suffering in the world, and all we have to do is turn on the evening news or look at our own lives to realize that. But rather, maybe the purpose of the book is to give us an example of faith in the person of Job. We know the happy ending of the story, but Job, when he started over, really didn't. He didn't know what was going to happen when he turned to his wife and asked her, do you want to try again? He didn't know what was going to happen if he had another child, or, God bless him, 10 more children. He didn't know whether he would be able to provide for his family. He didn't know what would happen in the future. But Job relied on his faith in God, and he understood that in good times and in bad times, God's presence would never leave him. And that understanding gives Job the ability to move forward with his life. I wonder if maybe that's a lesson for all of us. That the real happy ending for you and for me is that despite all the great obstacles that come our way, and regardless of the heartache that builds up within our hearts, that we have the ability to trust in the love and in the compassion of God, to know that no matter what, God will be with us, loving us and helping us begin again. The movie Awakenings, like the book of Job, has an ending that is happy. Dr. Sayer tells a group of grant donors to the hospital that although the awakenings did not last, there was another kind of awakening that occurred. It was a kind of awakening that makes you appreciate and live life to its fullest. Dr. Sayer, for instance, overcomes this painful shyness and asks one of the nurses to go out for coffee many months after he had declined a similar offer from her. The nurses treat their patients with more respect and care, and the woman that Leonard showed an interest in is seen visiting him in the hospital. The film ends with Sayer standing over Leonard behind a Ouija board with his hands on Leonard's hand as he seeks to spell out words. And it ends with this saying, "Let's begin." Perhaps that's the best kind of happy ending we could ever hope for. Amen.